Some mistakes end with a warning. Others echo all the way to the Pentagon. The flashing red and blue lights cut through the crisp morning air as traffic slowed along Interstate 95 just outside Arlington, Virginia. Drivers glanced into their mirrors, expecting another routine traffic stop, another ordinary moment on an ordinary Tuesday. But there was nothing ordinary about the dark gray sedan easing calmly onto the shoulder. Behind the wheel sat General Leon Bradford, a decorated four-star Air Force general whose quiet reputation had been built over 3 decades of service, countless overseas missions, and decisions that had shaped the future of America's national defense. Dressed in a perfectly pressed Navy Air Force service uniform, every ribbon, insignia, and silver star rested precisely where military tradition demanded. His posture remained composed as he turned off the engine, placed both hands on the steering wheel, and waited without the slightest hint of frustration. Inside the patrol vehicle, Officer Kyle Dawson adjusted his sunglasses before stepping onto the pavement with the confidence of someone who believed he had already figured out the entire situation before saying a single word. His polished boots struck the asphalt with measured authority as he approached the driver's side, barely giving the uniform inside the sedan more than a passing glance. To him, it looked like another costume, another attempt to appear important. The morning sun reflected across the windshield, forcing him to lean slightly closer before rapping twice on the window. General Bradford lowered the glass slowly, his expression calm, respectful, almost unreadable. "Good morning, officer," he said evenly. There was no irritation in his voice, only quiet professionalism. Dawson barely acknowledged the greeting. His eyes swept across the dashboard, the military identification holder, the immaculate uniform, then returned to Bradford's face with visible skepticism. "License and registration," he said flatly. Bradford reached carefully toward the center console, announcing every movement before retrieving his documents, a habit formed through decades of discipline rather than fear. Dawson accepted the paperwork, but seemed more interested in studying the man than reading the information in his hand. His eyebrows narrowed. "Quite a uniform you've got there," he remarked with a faint smile that carried more judgment than humor. Bradford simply nodded once. "Yes, sir." Cars continued rolling past, their occupants slowing just enough to wonder why a senior military officer appeared to be sitting quietly on the shoulder of one of the nation's busiest highways. A delivery driver glanced twice before continuing on. A retired veteran fueling his pickup across the exit ramp paused, squinting toward the scene with growing curiosity. Something about the bearing of the man inside the sedan seemed unmistakably familiar. Dawson ignored every passing stare. He took another slow look at the identification card in his hand, then back at the silver stars displayed on Bradford's shoulders. Instead of recognizing accomplishment, he saw only something he doubted. "Step out of the vehicle," he said. General Bradford met the officer's eyes for the first time. His voice remained steady. "May I ask the reason, officer?" Dawson's expression hardened. "I'll ask the questions." A long silence settled between them. It wasn't filled with anger. It was filled with certainty. Bradford had spent an entire career making decisions under impossible pressure, and he understood something Dawson did not. Sometimes the loudest display of authority came from the person with the least power in the moment. Without argument, without raising his voice, General Leon Bradford reached for the door handle, stepped onto the shoulder, straightened the Navy jacket that represented a lifetime of honorable service, and quietly said 6 words that no one standing there yet understood. "You should call your captain first." General Leon Bradford stepped out onto the shoulder with the same measured precision he had demonstrated during military inspections, diplomatic briefings, and moments when the weight of national security rested on his shoulders. His polished shoes settled firmly on the pavement as the breeze gently moved the edge of his Navy service jacket. Every medal reflected years of sacrifice. Every ribbon represented chapters of service that stretched across continents, and every silver star had been earned through responsibility rather than recognition. Yet none of those symbols seemed to matter to Officer Kyle Dawson. He circled the sedan slowly, scanning every detail as though searching for proof that something was out of place. The morning traffic continued flowing past at nearly 65 miles per hour, but more drivers than usual eased off the accelerator. There was something unusual about the scene. A senior military officer standing quietly beside a civilian sedan while a patrol officer examined every inch of the vehicle was enough to catch the attention of passing commuters. Some glanced once before driving away. Others looked twice, sensing a tension that could not be explained by an ordinary traffic stop. Dawson paused beside the driver's door and looked back toward Bradford. "You travel like this often?" he asked with unmistakable skepticism. Bradford answered with the same calm tone that never seemed to change. "I travel wherever duty requires." The response was respectful, but it carried no attempt to impress. Dawson folded his arms. "That is not what I asked." Bradford remained silent for a brief moment before replying. "I'm on official business." The officer exhaled through his nose, clearly dissatisfied. He studied the military identification card again, holding it under the sunlight as if expecting it to reveal some hidden flaw. The card appeared authentic. The uniform appeared authentic. Even the vehicle registration matched perfectly. Yet something inside Dawson refused to accept what was directly in front of him. Across the highway, a retired Air Force veteran named Harold Simmons had just finished filling his truck with gasoline. As he prepared to merge back onto the interstate, his eyes landed on the familiar silhouette standing beside the sedan. He frowned, leaning slightly toward the windshield. There was something unmistakable about Bradford's posture. Military bearing could not be manufactured. It was developed over decades of discipline. Harold considered stopping, but decided to continue driving, telling himself that surely the officer already knew exactly who he was speaking with. A few hundred yards away, a delivery van driver quietly activated his dashboard camera after noticing several vehicles slowing near the shoulder. He had no idea who either man was, only that something about the interaction felt increasingly unusual. Meanwhile, Dawson requested another records check through his shoulder radio. Dispatch acknowledged the request and began processing the information. Bradford stood patiently without shifting his weight or showing irritation. Years earlier, one of his instructors at the Air Force Academy had once told him that true leadership revealed itself most clearly during moments when nobody was watching. Today, plenty of people were watching, yet Bradford refused to let frustration dictate his actions. Dawson finally lowered the radio and looked directly at him again. "You seem awfully calm for someone being investigated." Bradford offered the faintest hint of smile. "Experience teaches patience, officer." Dawson interpreted the answer as arrogance instead of composure. He took one slow step closer, convinced that he remained firmly in control of the situation. What he did not know was that hundreds of miles away, inside one of the most secure buildings in the country, a meeting schedule had just been interrupted by a single unanswered arrival notification. Officer Kyle Dawson waited for the response from dispatch, tapping his fingers lightly against the edge of his duty belt while the silence stretched across the shoulder of the interstate. General Leon Bradford remained exactly where he had been instructed to stand, his hands relaxed at his sides, his eyes calmly following the endless stream of traffic moving toward Washington. To anyone passing by, he looked less like someone under investigation and more like a man waiting patiently for an appointment. That quiet confidence had been forged long before he ever wore 4 silver stars on his shoulders. Leon Bradford had grown up in rural Georgia, where respect was never demanded through words but earned through character. His father had served as an enlisted Air Force mechanic, teaching him that every uniform represented responsibility before privilege. His mother had spent more than 30 years as a public school teacher, reminding him every evening that education and discipline could open doors that prejudice tried to keep closed. Those lessons stayed with him long after he entered the United States Air Force Academy. While many cadets relied on natural talent alone, Bradford became known for relentless preparation. He arrived early, stayed late, and treated every assignment as though lives depended upon it, because someday they would. Years later, he flew missions that required absolute precision, commanded squadrons under extraordinary pressure, and eventually led thousands of service members whose trust had been earned through consistency rather than speeches. His colleagues often described him with the same words: calm, decisive, humble. The young pilots under his command admired him because he never asked anyone to accept a responsibility he would not accept himself. Civilian leaders respected him because he listened before speaking. International allies trusted him because his word never changed once it was given. Despite decades of recognition, Bradford rarely discussed awards or promotions. The framed photographs inside his office showed young airmen receiving medals, families welcoming loved ones home, and teams accomplishing missions together. His own accomplishments occupied very little space. Earlier that morning, he had departed Andrews Air Force Base before sunrise after receiving an unexpected request to attend a classified strategic meeting inside the Pentagon. The agenda involved national defense planning that only a handful of senior officials had been cleared to discuss. His delayed arrival had already triggered quiet concern inside the secure conference room, where military leaders noticed that one chair remained empty. At first, they assumed traffic had slowed his commute. Then they attempted to contact him through secure channels. Each unanswered call added another layer of confusion. Back on the interstate, Dawson glanced once more at the identification card before returning it to Bradford. "Interesting record," he muttered. "You have certainly been around." Bradford accepted the card politely. "I have been fortunate to serve." There was no pride in his voice, only gratitude. Dawson studied him carefully, almost expecting some emotional reaction that never came. The officer had encountered nervous drivers, angry drivers, frightened drivers, and impatient drivers. He had rarely encountered someone whose composure remained completely untouched by the circumstances surrounding him. That composure only deepened Dawson's suspicion instead of easing it. Nearby, another state trooper slowed while passing the scene, briefly looking toward Bradford's uniform before continuing down the highway. The moment lasted only seconds, but it planted the first quiet seed of doubt. Somewhere beyond the concrete barriers and rushing traffic, events were already beginning to shift in ways neither man could yet see, and the distance between a routine traffic stop and a national chain of command was becoming shorter with every passing minute. The dispatcher finally responded through Officer Kyle Dawson's shoulder radio with a calm voice that carried none of the urgency building behind the scenes. "Identification verified. No outstanding warrants. Registration is valid." Dawson frowned instead of relaxing. The clean report did not satisfy him. If anything, it made him believe he simply had not looked deeply enough. He pressed the transmit button again. "Run the military credentials one more time." Dispatch acknowledged the request without hesitation. General Leon Bradford stood quietly beneath the bright Virginia sky, his polished Navy uniform untouched except for the gentle breeze that occasionally lifted the edge of his jacket. Every passing second increased the likelihood that someone at the Pentagon would begin asking why one of the nation's senior Air Force leaders had not arrived for a meeting that had been planned weeks in advance. Yet Bradford never glanced at his watch. He understood that impatience rarely improved difficult situations. Dawson slowly walked another circle around the sedan. He looked through each window, examined the government parking decal on the windshield, and noticed a neatly organized folder resting on the passenger seat. Nothing appeared suspicious. Everything reflected discipline and order. That only deepened the contradiction in his mind. He stopped beside Bradford again. "Where exactly are you headed this morning?" Bradford answered without hesitation. "The Pentagon." Dawson raised one eyebrow. "For what?" "Official military business." "What kind of business?" Bradford looked directly at him. "I'm not authorized to discuss the details." The response was respectful, but it frustrated Dawson. To him, every short answer sounded like avoidance. To Bradford, every answer respected both military protocol and the authority of a law enforcement officer performing his duties. Nearby, two construction workers standing beside a highway maintenance truck paused their conversation as they watched the unusual exchange continue. One quietly pointed toward Bradford's uniform and said, "That looks like a general." The other shrugged. "If it is, this is going to become somebody else's problem." Less than a mile away, traffic reports had already begun mentioning a minor slowdown caused by a police stop on the interstate shoulder. Nobody on the radio knew the identity of the man standing beside the sedan. Inside the Pentagon, however, concern continued to grow. A secure administrative officer attempted another scheduled check-in. Again, there was no answer. That alone was unusual. General Bradford had built a reputation for punctuality that bordered on legendary. If he was late, there was always a serious reason. A senior aide quietly informed several officials that his vehicle had never entered the Pentagon security checkpoint. The room became noticeably quieter. Back on the highway, Dawson took one slow breath before speaking again. "You told me I should call my captain." "Why?" Bradford's expression remained composed. "Because I believe it would help resolve this situation more quickly." "Is that supposed to impress me?" Dawson asked. "No, officer," Bradford replied evenly. "It is simply professional advice." The words were delivered without sarcasm, without challenge, and without anger. That calmness unsettled Dawson far more than an argument would have. He had expected defensiveness, excuses, or frustration. Instead, he found himself standing across from a man who never seemed to lose control of the moment. Then the radio on Dawson's shoulder crackled once more, but this time the dispatcher's tone had changed. It was quieter, more careful. "Officer Dawson, stand by. Your captain is requesting immediate contact. He says do not leave your current location." Dawson looked at the radio with visible confusion. Bradford simply lifted his eyes toward the horizon, as though he had quietly expected that moment to arrive. Officer Kyle Dawson stared at the radio for a brief moment before lifting it toward his shoulder. "This is Dawson," he answered. The reply came almost immediately. "Officer, remain exactly where you are. Captain Samuel Whitmore is on his way. Do not clear the scene." Dawson frowned. "Captain, with all due respect, this is just a traffic stop." The dispatcher hesitated before responding. "Those are your instructions." The transmission ended. A strange silence settled over the highway shoulder. Dawson lowered the radio slowly, trying to understand why a routine stop had suddenly attracted the attention of his commanding officer. Across from him, General Leon Bradford remained composed, his expression unchanged. He did not smile. He did not appear relieved. He simply waited with the patience of someone who had spent an entire career allowing facts to speak louder than emotion. "You knew this was going to happen," Dawson said, narrowing his eyes. Bradford answered honestly. "I knew someone would eventually ask questions." "About you?" Dawson asked. "About why I have not arrived where I was expected to be." That answer lingered in Dawson's mind longer than he wanted to admit. For the first time since activating his emergency lights, uncertainty quietly replaced confidence. He glanced again toward the military identification card in his hand before looking back at the man standing only a few feet away. Everything continued to match. The documents were genuine. The vehicle was properly registered. The uniform was flawless. Even the dispatch system had found nothing unusual. Yet something about the situation continued to evolve beyond his understanding. Several passing motorists had now slowed enough to notice that neither man was arguing. There were no raised voices, no dramatic gestures, only an unusually long conversation beside a dark gray sedan. A woman waiting at the nearby traffic light quietly lowered her window and looked toward the scene before continuing on her way. Less than 10 minutes earlier, it had appeared to be an ordinary police stop. Now it felt like everyone instinctively sensed that something much larger was unfolding. Nearly 15 miles away, inside the Pentagon, another secure phone rang. An administrative officer quietly approached the conference room where several senior defense leaders had gathered around a polished table. The officer leaned toward the chairman and whispered a brief update. General Bradford had still not checked in. His secure travel schedule showed no authorized changes. The chairman's expression became noticeably more serious. "Locate him immediately," he said. Within moments, another office began tracing the final confirmed location of the government vehicle assigned to Bradford's travel authorization. The answer returned almost instantly. Interstate 95. Stationary. Alongside a state patrol unit. Back on the highway, Dawson folded his arms once again, attempting to regain the confidence that had begun slipping away. "If you are really expected somewhere important," he said, "someone can wait a few more minutes." Bradford met his eyes with the same quiet professionalism. "Important meetings can be rescheduled. Trust cannot." Dawson blinked, unsure how to respond. Those words carried no accusation. They sounded more like a lesson than a criticism. Before either man spoke again, the distant sound of another patrol vehicle approached from behind. Its emergency lights reflected across the rear window of the sedan as Captain Samuel Whitmore's cruiser pulled onto the shoulder. He stepped out quickly, his face unusually focused. But before he could even reach them, the phone mounted inside his vehicle began ringing through the department's secure command channel. The caller identification displayed only one word. Pentagon Captain Samuel Whitmore stopped beside his cruiser before answering the secure call. His expression remained professional, but the instant he saw the caller identification, every assumption he had made about the morning disappeared. He pressed the accept button without taking another step. Captain Whitmore speaking. The voice on the other end was calm, direct, and unmistakably official. "This is the office of the Secretary of Defense. We are attempting to confirm the location of General Leon Bradford." Whitmore instinctively looked across the shoulder toward the tall man, standing quietly beside the gray sedan. "Yes, sir," he answered carefully. "General Bradford is currently at my location." There was a brief pause before the reply came. General Bradford was scheduled to attend a secure strategic briefing 27 minutes ago. Multiple senior defense officials are waiting for his arrival. "We have confirmed that his travel authorization remains active. We need to know why he has been delayed." Whitmore slowly exhaled. He was stopped during a traffic investigation. Another brief silence followed. This time it felt even heavier. "Captain, is General Bradford safe?" "Yes, sir." "Has he been treated professionally?" Whitmore hesitated for only a fraction of a second before answering honestly. "I have only just arrived on scene." The official voice remained composed. "Please ensure that General Bradford's safety, dignity, and transportation are immediately addressed. We will expect a complete report through your chain of command." The secretary has already been notified of the delay. The call ended without another word. Whitmore lowered the phone slowly, staring at the blank screen for several seconds. Officer Kyle Dawson watched from several yards away, unable to read his captain's expression. The confidence that had filled the roadside only minutes earlier had quietly disappeared. Whitmore walked toward General Bradford with measured steps. Before speaking, he extended his hand respectfully. "General Bradford, I am Captain Samuel Whitmore. I appreciate your patience." Bradford accepted the handshake with the same calm professionalism he had shown since the beginning of the encounter. "Good morning, Captain." There was no resentment in his voice, no satisfaction, only courtesy. Dawson looked back and forth between the two men, trying to understand what had just happened. "Captain," he interrupted, "what is going on?" Whitmore turned toward him with an expression Dawson had never seen before. It was not anger. It was the unmistakable seriousness of someone who had just realized the full weight of a situation. "Officer Dawson," he said evenly, "do you understand who this gentleman is?" Dawson answered without hesitation. "He says he is an Air Force general." Whitmore held his gaze. "He does not say he is one. He is one." Those words settled over the quiet highway like a sudden change in the weather. Dawson instinctively looked again at the silver stars resting on Bradford's shoulders, but now they seemed completely different. They were no longer decorations on a uniform. They represented decades of earned leadership and responsibility at the highest level of military service. Before anyone could continue, Whitmore's secure phone rang a second time. He answered immediately. "Captain Whitmore." The voice this time came from an Air Force lieutenant general serving inside the Pentagon. "Captain, General Bradford has instructed everyone to remain calm. He has requested that this matter be handled professionally and according to procedure. He has made no complaint. However, the Department of Defense expects complete cooperation while we ensure his timely arrival." Whitmore glanced toward Bradford, who simply gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Even now, with the attention of the nation's highest defense offices focused on a quiet stretch of interstate, General Leon Bradford seemed more concerned with preserving professionalism than proving a point. Officer Kyle Dawson felt the weight of the moment settle over him as the meaning of Captain Samuel Whitmore's words finally became impossible to ignore. The man standing quietly beside the gray sedan was not simply a respected military officer. He was one of the senior leaders entrusted with decisions that reached far beyond any single installation or command. Dawson searched General Leon Bradford's face for signs of satisfaction, frustration, or even quiet vindication. Instead, he found only the same steady expression that had been there from the beginning. Bradford neither celebrated the revelation nor used it to diminish anyone standing before him. He simply waited. Captain Whitmore took a slow breath before addressing Dawson in a measured voice. "Officer, I need you to step over here for a moment." They moved several feet away from the shoulder while traffic continued flowing past. Whitmore lowered his voice. "Do you understand why professionalism matters during every stop, regardless of who is standing in front of you?" Dawson looked toward Bradford before answering. "Yes, Captain." Whitmore held his gaze. "No, I do not think you do. If this had been any ordinary citizen, they deserve the same respect you should have shown here today. Rank is not what changes our standards. Character does." Those words struck harder than any formal reprimand could have. Dawson remained silent. For the first time that morning, he replayed every question he had asked, every assumption he had made, and every conclusion he had reached before allowing the facts to guide him. Across the shoulder, Bradford quietly adjusted one cuff beneath his Navy service jacket, showing no interest in listening to the private conversation. He respected the chain of command, even when it involved another profession. Moments later, Whitmore and Dawson walked back together. Whitmore spoke first. "General Bradford, on behalf of this department, I apologize for the delay that has affected your official travel. We will ensure you reach your destination as quickly as possible." Bradford nodded respectfully. "Thank you, Captain. I appreciate your professionalism." Dawson hesitated before taking one careful step forward. His voice was noticeably quieter than it had been only minutes earlier. "General Bradford, I should have approached this differently." Bradford met his eyes without hesitation. "Officer, every day gives us an opportunity to improve tomorrow's decisions." There was no lecture hidden inside the sentence. There was only experience. Dawson lowered his eyes briefly, understanding that he had just received more grace than he had expected. At that same moment, another black government sedan exited the interstate and pulled carefully onto the shoulder. Two Air Force security personnel stepped out, approached Captain Whitmore, quietly identified themselves, and confirmed that they had been dispatched to assist with General Bradford's arrival at the Pentagon. Their professionalism mirrored Bradford's own. There were no dramatic gestures, no raised voices, and no attempt to escalate the situation. Everything unfolded with calm precision. One of the security officers respectfully opened the rear passenger door of the government vehicle before waiting for Bradford. General Bradford turned first toward Captain Whitmore. "Thank you for responding personally." Whitmore answered immediately. "It was my responsibility, General." Bradford then looked once more at Dawson. "Officer, I sincerely hope the rest of your day goes safely." The simple kindness of those words lingered far longer than any criticism could have. As Bradford entered the waiting sedan and the convoy prepared to continue toward the Pentagon, Dawson watched the vehicle merge back into traffic, realizing that the most powerful person he had encountered all morning had never once attempted to prove that he was powerful at all. The convoy reached the Pentagon just as the morning briefing was being adjusted to accommodate the unexpected delay. General Leon Bradford stepped from the government sedan with the same quiet confidence he had carried throughout the entire morning. Several senior officers waiting near the entrance greeted him with respectful nods before walking beside him into the building. No one rushed to dramatize what had happened on the highway. The focus remained exactly where Bradford believed it should be, on the mission that had brought everyone together in the first place. Before entering the secure conference room, One defense official quietly asked if he wished to file an immediate formal complaint regarding the roadside encounter. Bradford paused for only a moment before answering. "I want the facts documented accurately. Beyond that, I trust every organization to follow its own professional standards." His response surprised several people standing nearby. There was no demand for punishment, no emotional speech, and no attempt to use his position to influence the outcome. He understood that accountability carried the greatest value when it came through established procedures rather than personal influence. Meanwhile, Captain Samuel Whitmore returned to district headquarters with Officer Kyle Dawson riding silently in the passenger seat of the patrol vehicle. The drive that normally lasted less than 20 minutes felt considerably longer. Neither man spoke for several miles. Dawson replayed every moment of the encounter in his mind. He remembered the calm greeting. He remembered the respectful answers. He remembered the quiet recommendation to call his captain. None of those moments had been confrontational. The conflict had existed almost entirely inside his own assumptions. When they arrived at the station, Whitmore instructed Dawson to complete a detailed incident report while body camera footage and dispatch communications were preserved according to department policy. "Document everything exactly as it happened," Whitmore said. "Accuracy matters more than appearances." Dawson nodded without argument. For the first time in years, writing an official report felt less like paperwork and more like self-examination. Every sense forced him to confront choices that, only hours earlier, had seemed perfectly reasonable. Throughout the afternoon, department leadership received formal inquiries from both state officials and military representatives requesting copies of the routine documentation connected to the stop. Every request emphasized the same principle: transparency. Nobody attempted to hide the incident. Nobody attempted to exaggerate it. Facts would determine the outcome. Late that evening, Whitmore received a brief message from the Pentagon through official channels. It contained no criticism and no special demands. Instead, it expressed appreciation for the department's cooperation after the situation had been clarified. Attached to the message was a short personal note. From General Bradford, "Thank you for ensuring professionalism prevailed. Public trust is strengthened when every institution remains committed to fairness." Whitmore read the message twice before quietly placing his phone on the desk. He knew those words would stay with him long after the paperwork had been archived. Across town, Dawson finished his report and remained seated alone in the nearly empty office. He thought about the difference between authority and respect. One could be granted by a badge. The other had to be earned every single day. Earlier that morning, he had believed confidence came from assuming he already understood the person standing before him. Now he realized genuine professionalism began by recognizing how much remained unknown until every fact had been carefully considered. Somewhere inside the Pentagon, General Leon Bradford concluded the strategic meeting he had nearly missed and prepared to leave for his next assignment exactly as he approached every responsibility. Quietly, faithfully, and without allowing one difficult morning to distract him from serving something greater than himself. Several weeks passed before the final reviews were quietly completed through the normal procedures of both organizations. The documentation, body camera recordings, dispatch logs, and witness statements were examined carefully, not to create headlines, but to understand exactly how an ordinary traffic stop had become an extraordinary lesson. Every timeline matched. Every conversation had been preserved. Most importantly, every decision could now be evaluated through facts instead of assumptions. Officer Kyle Dawson accepted the department's findings without protest. The experience became part of additional professional development, reinforcing principles that every law enforcement officer was expected to uphold regardless of the circumstances or the individual standing across from them. For Dawson, the outcome was not defined by embarrassment, but by reflection. He began approaching every interaction with greater patience, asking more questions before reaching conclusions and listening more carefully before speaking. His fellow officers gradually noticed the difference. The confidence that had once come from certainty was replaced by confidence built upon fairness. Captain Samuel Whitmore also carried the events of that morning into every future briefing with younger officers. Without mentioning names, he often reminded them that professionalism was measured long before anyone discovered a person's title, occupation, or influence. Treat every person with dignity first, he would say. If they are a teacher, they deserve it. If they are a mechanic, they deserve it. If they wear a military uniform, they deserve it. If they wear none of those things, they still deserve it. Those simple words quietly became part of the culture he hoped to strengthen within his department. General Leon Bradford never publicly discussed the incident. When colleagues occasionally asked about the delayed meeting that morning, he redirected the conversation toward the mission they had accomplished together instead. His focus remained exactly where it had always been, on service before recognition. Months later, during a leadership forum attended by military officers, community leaders, and public safety professionals, Bradford was invited to answer a question about leadership under pressure. He paused thoughtfully before responding. Leadership is revealed most clearly when you possess every opportunity to demand respect, but instead choose to demonstrate it. The room fell completely silent. No one needed additional explanation. Those who understood the story recognized the deeper meaning hidden inside those few words. Those who did not still found themselves reflecting on the truth behind them. Far beyond the conference hall, life continued as it always had. Patrol cars still monitored highways across America. Military aircraft still crossed the skies above countless communities. Thousands of public servants continued reporting for duty each morning with the shared responsibility of protecting people they had never met. The events on that quiet stretch of interstate became less about one officer and one general and more about something every institution depends upon. Trust cannot survive where assumptions replace facts. Respect cannot depend upon titles. Justice becomes strongest when it is extended equally before anyone knows who is standing in front of them. On that morning, General Leon Bradford never needed to remind anyone of his rank, because his character had already spoken more clearly than any insignia ever could. Officer Kyle Dawson discovered that authority alone could direct actions, but only humility could transform a person. And somewhere beyond the noise of traffic, beyond flashing lights and official reports, one truth continued to echo long after every vehicle had driven away. Power may command attention for a moment, but integrity earns respect for a lifetime. Please like and subscribe to the channel to hear more stories of justice.